Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Hey guys, let's go. I always wondered why, if I would expect if you get rid of traffic speed limits, then you would have more accidents and more deadly accidents. But I'm sure Germany would have switched that rule of having no speed limit on the Autobahn if there was enough data to show that. And since there isn't, I'm very curious as to why that's the case. So let's go. CNBC. No speed limits in Germany. Why the US doesn't have an Autobahn. Maybe Germany just has better drivers. I don't know.
Audi, BMW, Mercedes-Benz, Porsche. These cars have made Germany famous for automotive engineering, and they are fast and powerful enough for these equally famous German roads, which are unlike any other in the world. The Autobahn, a national highway system with no top speed limit. If you love cars, chances are driving the Autobahn as fast as you can is one of the things you want to do before you die.
Being able to actually
292 kilometers per hour is what was shown in that car speed. So what would that be in miles per hour? I think 1 mile is... I always get confused with the pound to kilogram conversion and the mile to kilometer conversion. I'm pretty sure the pound to kilogram is 2.2 pounds per kilogram. And sometimes I get that confused with kilometer. So I don't really know
put your
how
vehicle
fast that is.
to the test
It's got to be insanely above 100 miles per hour, I'm sure.
and really show its full potential is the ultimate.
Everything about the Autobahn owes a lot to Germany's unique and difficult history.
So there's this kind of bizarre Cold War moment when German lawmakers argue that being a free citizen, somebody who is not living in a totalitarian dictatorship, has to be able to drive as fast as they want.
So why doesn't the US or any other country in the world have an Autobahn? And is it really
But weren't they in a totalitarian dictatorship?
all it's cracked up to be? First things first, what is the Autobahn? The full name is actually Bundesautobahn, which simply means federal highway. It is a more than 8,000-mile system of limited access freeways that run all throughout
So does Bahn mean street or road in German?
Germany. 8,000-mile system of limited access freeways that run all throughout Germany. The word Autobahn is often just translated as motorway. In simple design terms, it's quite similar to freeways in the United States. Limited access means cars and trucks only. No pedestrians, no bicycles, no skateboards, nothing other than cars. There are designated entry and exit points and no
Automobiles.
stoplights or intersections. The roots of the Autobahn go back all the way to the early 20th century, but really, the first big step in its growth happened under Adolf Hitler. There really was no need for it at all. Few Germans owned cars. Most took public transit, which was plenty fast and got people to where they needed to go. The Autobahn's real potential was as propaganda.
They want to build a sort of a futuristic mega project, something that would lend itself to, talking about the regime as a modern forward.
Yeah, so the highway system in America, I believe is... Maybe there would have been more individual highways, or what you would call highways in America prior to the 1950s. Maybe there were interstate roads where you would go faster than you would on a normal road, right? Side street. But I know that like the Interstate Highway Act of creating this connected giant system of highways throughout the United States was, I believe, under Eisenhower in the 50s. And so it does seem to have been pretty revolutionary then for the 1930s, 20 years or so prior, for Germany having it. I can see that, we take it for granted today, but I could see that as a pretty big leap in automobile travel, for
looking
sure.
regime. At the same time, while he was politically speaking a very repressive, totalitarian dictatorship, right? It was about symbolizing power, the conquest of space.
By the end of World War II, there were less than 4,000 kilometers built, about 2,500 miles. It was really from the 1960s through the 80s that the Autobahn system we know today was properly developed.
This was obviously a time when the Federal Republic became sort of an affluent Western liberal democracy and also much more of a consumer society. So people actually began to own cars in much higher numbers.
Hey, yeah, I would love to see I would imagine East-West Germany. I would imagine a lot of, I would be curious to see the connecting efforts after the fall of Soviet occupied Germany, and I'm sure a lot of logistic efforts were taken to connect those of the roads of West Germany to former East Germany.
The post-World War II era is also when the Autobahn gained its most famous trait: long stretches with no speed limits. During the Nazi era, the speed limits were mainly to conserve fuel for the war effort.
The birth of a new free nation for Germany.
Once West Germany became independent and separate from the Communist East in 1949, it kept the Nazi-era speed limits for a few years. But then,
in a really astonishing move, the federal parliament in 1952 decides to abolish all speed limits, not just on the Autobahn, but on any kind of highway and in urban areas as well. And you can imagine the results, especially in cities, right, with cars going as fast as they want.
crashes, injuries, and fatalities all rose until the government started reinstating limits on roads. It mostly left the Autobahn alone. Mostly. Today, speed is regulated on about 40% of the motorways. Some limits are fixed, others are dynamic, changing according to conditions. On the rest of the freeway, the recommended speed limit is about 80 miles per hour. That means if you get into a crash at a speed above that, you can be held liable for the accident.
That's high. That's still insanely high. I want to say the highest speed limit I've ever seen might have been, I feel like I might have seen a 70 mile per hour speed limit. But even that, I'm not exactly sure of. And if I am correct in remembering that, that is really fast. I would say the highway speed limit for like major, you are in the main river, so to speak, of the highway is about 65 miles an hour. But 55 is definitely not unheard of. Anything below 55, I would see as non-highway. I want to use air quotes because some roads can look like highways, but maybe not. I mean, the main big arteries of car traffic is probably, the average is probably about 65 miles per hour. It might be a state thing to decide the speed limit. I'm not sure about the federal laws on speeds on highways. I feel like it's a state thing, though I could be wrong. Over 80 miles per hour is crazy. That's my main point of stopping here.
My parents commute regularly from...
Not crazy as if, like, I think that's stupid, but it's very high in my mind.
Nuremberg to Munich. And my mom will drive 100 miles an hour, and it's not a big deal.
It's not that unusual to just travel somewhere at 200 kilometers an hour, which is around 125 miles an hour. But all
crazy.
things considered, on average, I would say it's probably best to imagine Autobahn traffic somewhat like driving through Texas, maybe, or through Kansas. People don't drive slow. It's quite fast all the way around, but it's not recklessly fast. It's not race car fast.
German race car driver Rudolf Caracciola is still believed to hold the record for the fastest speed ever recorded on the Autobahn, 268.8 miles per hour.
Wow.
But others have come quite close, such as a Bugatti Chiron that hit 257 in 2021.
So I have driven a BMW B7. It's an Alpina 600 horsepower sedan. I drove that 170 on the Autobahn. That's the fastest I've driven. It was difficult to do, by the way.
I'd rather not talk about the
I think the fastest I've ever gone while driving, obviously it was illegal, was around 100 and 40, which was, and I think I haven't gone anywhere near that since. And that is stupidly fast. I mean, I was much younger. I would never go that fast again. But I've definitely going even above 100 miles an hour. You feel still in control, but stuff starts passing so fast that if you don't have a good two seconds of reaction time, you're gonna probably meet a pretty bad end. That's gonna depend on how other people are also driving. So if everyone is driving, 120 miles an hour, and you're also driving that fast, then I can see that as less dangerous than you driving 120 miles per hour on a road where people usually drive around 90 miles per hour max, right? So it'll depend on where you're driving for it to be considered dangerous, I guess. So.
Fast as I went, even though it's legal to do so. Let's just say I once went 4 towns away from us by accident. I didn't want to go that far, but I was just going a little too quickly.
German automakers don't necessarily make their cars specifically for the Autobahn, but the demands of high-speed environments like these highways do influence their engineering decisions and marketing. Mercedes refers to their cars as Autobahn proven.
Driving at high speed is not a video game. It should be relaxed cruising. Yeah? And the big challenge for us is controlling the energy in the car, which increases with the square of speed. And that becomes very important at speeds over about, I would say, 60 miles per hour.
It starts with aerodynamic designs, but axles, suspension systems, springs, dampers, roll bars, the tires, the braking systems are all tuned to perform at this level.
We tune the vehicle safety, the comfort and agility, yes, to deliver a typical Mercedes-Benz driving character at high speeds.
Mercedes even has an onboard system designed to keep the car on course when it is hit from the side by a strong gust of wind.
Even with startling events like, for example, powerful wind gusts. So our aim is to keep the car stable and safely on course at high speed without permanent steering corrections, while damping out bothersome chassis motions. And the car will always support the driver by being tolerant of mistakes.
To understand why Germany is basically the only country in the world with
This is the real question I want to know the answer to.
a mostly unregulated highway like this, it is probably best to look at what makes Germany's driving laws and car culture so different from, say, the supposedly freedom-loving United States. First of all,
Supposedly.
it's a lot harder to drive a car in general in Germany. You can't get a license in the country until the age of 18. In the US, the law varies, but in most states, people can obtain learner's permits at 15 and receive licenses allowing them to drive legally under
Yeah, I think for us, it was 15 and a half. So 15 and 6 months, I believe, I live in Rhode Island, one of the 50 states in the U.S., the smallest state in the Northeast, the smallest state in the country, and it's in the Northeast in New England. And I believe you start going to driving school when you're 15 years old. And then when you're 15 and 6 months and you pass the exam, you can then get your driver's permit, which you need to have for 6 months. I could be getting some of these details incorrect, but I'm roughly correct for my case. And then you have your driver's permit for about 6 months, and then when you hit 16, you can get your legitimate, you can drive alone license. And the driver's permit, I'm not sure if it's a universal thing, so, is when you can drive a car legally, but you have to have, I forget if you had designated people. I think you might have just had to have someone over 25 years old, might have around there. But yeah, your permit was you could drive, but you had to have someone who had been driving for a while in the passenger seat to, kind of guide you through.
at least some conditions by the age of 16. It is also far more expensive and challenging to obtain a license. Many hours of instruction are required and the tests are demanding.
It's much more difficult, it's more expensive.
verstanden.
A lot of people fail their driving tests, myself included.
Fees for a license and
I failed my first time driving test. I was going into an intersection and I wanted to turn left and go through traffic, but I pulled too far into the intersection instead of waiting back before the intersection to when I could clearly turn, and that's what screwed me, and I had to take it again. And I had a girlfriend at the time in high school, and it was devastating for me. So yeah, not great.
All of the associated instruction in Germany can run 2,500 to 3,500 euros when you add up the costs. The fee for a driver's license in the state of California is $45, but that state, as is common in the US, requires driver education classes as well.
Classic. Open parking lot.
Then the certification state, as is common in the US, requires driver education classes as well.
Yeah.
Then the certification process for your car in the country is also extremely stringent.
I had to get my 500 euro minivan through it. It was not easy. And that sort of makes the Autobahn feel safer. You know you're surrounded by cars that have been rigorously checked. A lot of cars here in the States, especially in the Rust Belt, would probably not be fit for the Autobahn.
Having such barriers in the US would really limit the number of people and cars who can drive in a country that is right now far more car dependent than Germany is.
Yeah.
Americans drive about twice as much as Germans.
Germany is a much more urbanized country. There's lots of people who live in major cities who don't even have a driver's license. They get around using public transit and use rail.
I'm sure that's part of the reason why the driving age in the US is lower than in Germany, is because if you can't drive, I mean, you can't always just be like, oh, just take the bus or take the train. Okay, where's the bus? Where's the train? A lot of the times it's not there. And so if you don't have your driver's license, essentially you can't really go anywhere that you want to independently.
Then there is the cost of this. A lot of engineering goes into keeping these motorways drivable at these speeds. The pavement is extremely smooth and is more or less constantly maintained. That's expensive. The German government spends 5 times more on the Autobahn than it does on its other federal highways.
If you look at the average American freeway or interstate, you will usually just find concrete surfaces. And in Germany, it's way more intricate than that. You can drive through the pouring rain on modern strips of Autobahn that were recently redone, and you don't have any spray whatsoever. You can travel at very high speeds through the pouring rain, and that is no issue at all.
That's what's so cool about Germany with the Autobahn, is that if you were to tell me that some random country around the world doesn't have a speed limit, my first thought would be to think they just don't care about safety or enforcing the law that much. But with Germany, it's the opposite. It's like, no, they care so much that they care a lot, and they maintain it and check cars and check drivers so much so that this can actually happen. So props to Germany.
The U.S. population is far larger than Germany's. Building up a highway system that could realistically handle such high speeds would require much investment. And U.S. infrastructure suffers both criticism and financial insecurity.
But also, I mean, the USA is way larger than Germany. Certainly more. I mean, that's a ton of people for the size of Germany as a country. And so you have more population density, which is going to mean more drivers in a given area, usually.
And Germany's building up a highway system that could realistically handle such high speeds would require much investment. And U.S. infrastructure suffers both criticism and financial insecurity. The thing is, Tracy says, Americans might not be missing as much as they think they are.
I have found that the reality is just, it's a little bit anticlimactic in a way. It's just not quite what you want it to be.
Just because there is no speed limit doesn't mean you will always be able to drive fast. Across Germany, there were about 516,000 traffic jams in a single year. And the number of hours Germans spend in traffic has been rising. Several highways had traffic jams that were longer than 40 miles.
It's under construction a lot. It makes sense. If you have an unrestricted highway, it has to be perfect. You can't have a deep pothole like in Detroit where I used.
Also, when you create a highway system with a given population, when that population is much larger, you're going to have more people to have to think about when
to live.
designing roads.
If you had one of those potholes on the Autobahn, you'd see cars getting air.
Germany's Autobahns are also major thoroughfares for international commerce.
Or maybe they'd go so fast that they would just skip right over it.
Germany is kind of right smack dab in the center there of Europe. It's sort of this connector between east and west, even north and south. So you see a lot of commerce. A lot of trucks are traveling on that Autobahn.
Right, you go from the Baltic Sea and the North Sea to the Alps. And so if you're in Northern Europe and you want to travel from east to west, you got to go through Germany.
And they are not fast.
If you come to Germany and expect a large and vast countryside and you can go wherever as fast as you like, then you might get disappointed because it's quite crowded and we have
No, you're stupid.
large cities.
The absence of speed limits on German motorways divides even German opinion. Polls have shown that a slight majority of Germans favor introducing a hard limit on the Autobahn for safety reasons and to help the country hit environmental goals. Speed does worsen the severity of crashes and raises the risks of injuries and deaths. That said, most of Germany's vehicle fatalities happen on rural roads, followed by urban ones. The share of motorway fatalities is also smaller than those in some other OECD countries, such as Slovenia, Luxembourg, and Belgium.
I guess there's studies supporting each side of that argument, but you know, the numbers don't lie. You don't have much differences in fuel consumption, for example. It just doesn't make a whole lot of difference to drive 130 kilometers per hour or keep it open. And you also have to consider the fact that we don't always travel at full speed all the time.
There are also strict rules. The left lane is for passing. Unlike highway.
You hear that? It's like one of my biggest pet peeves. I'm not saying I'm always like on the ass of the car in front of me, of course not, but when a car is in the left lane or a vehicle is in the left lane and is going as fast as a vehicle in the lane next to it, especially in a 2-lane highway or road, it drives me insane. Because it's like you think so little of other people and you're so self-centered that you don't even realize that you are causing other people to slow down when you can go the same speed in the lane next to it.
In many other countries, you cannot pass on the right. If someone is behind you in the left lane, you have to move over. Tailgating is a serious offense that comes with heavy fines.
It's also for everybody a high responsibility. So that's why we are not allowed to pass on the right lane. You have to also adapt your speed.
Statistically speaking, Autobahns are safer than other roads, but they mostly has to do with the fact that there's only cars and only trucks. I mean, there are people who literally are afraid to drive on the Autobahn because of the lack of a speed limit.
In like manner, the data on how much introducing a speed limit would reduce carbon pollution has met with skepticism, though some recent numbers suggest it might be more than previously believed.
Anybody who owns an electric car will tell you, when they go fast on the highway, their range plummets. The BMW i3, which was developed right there in Munich. And that car, I can drive it in the city and I'll go 180 miles in the city on a charge, but on the freeway I'll do 115.
So in many ways, Americans envious of these German speedways might be missing out on a bit of fun, but it might also be true they are envious of something that is more myth than reality.
I think a lot of Americans probably would travel to Germany, they'd get a fast car and they'd say, woohoo, let's do it. And then they'd be stuck behind a truck in traffic and they'd be like, what the heck's going on? It is not a racetrack, but every now and then, the right stretch of the Autobahn and the right time of day and the right car, you can reach automotive nirvana.
Okay, yeah, if you are so keen on getting to Germany and being able to drive on the Autobahn and getting a nice car, before you even research your ability to be able to drive fast on the Autobahn, that seems like a you problem to me. So, another thing when it comes to the statistics about safer driving in Germany, and when it comes to like automotive fatalities, deaths, and you compare them to other countries, I'm not saying that's a mute statistic with no point, but if you also take into the account that Germany is more stringent when allowing people to drive and more proactive in fixing the roads and getting rid of potholes and making sure certain cars are up to speed and capable to drive, well, then that kind of skews the statistics a bit. And you have to imagine if you had the same laws about who can drive and how you drive and what you drive with a Autobahn that has a speed limit, then that seems like a better comparison, although not as easily studied with statistics. So very interesting video. Hope everyone is doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. Did I say something you disagree with or was flat out wrong? Let me know. Any questions I asked, you guys are great at answering them. So hope everyone's doing well, and I hope I'll see you guys next video. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.